The cemetery sat quiet under a gray savanna sky, the kind of stillness that pressed against your chest. Cal Donovan pulled his coat tighter as the wind stirred the Spanish moss above him, its long ghost-like strands swaying over the old headstones. He hadn't been here in a year, not since Benji asked why they never visited his mother anymore. He didn't have a good answer then. He still didn't. Wait in the car, he'd told Benji, though he knew the boy wouldn't. 10 years old, full of quiet thoughts, just like his mother had been. Cal walked the familiar path toward the east side of Bonaventure Cemetery, past stone angels, and names carved in marble names that used to mean nothing until they meant everything. Tess Donovan had chosen this place herself. Peaceful but dramatic, she'd said, smiling that sly smile. Like me, right, that was Tess. Always performing. Always half in a dream, half in control. She made people feel seen, but always kept a piece of herself locked behind her eyes. Now all that was left was a slab of stone and a boy who barely remembered her. Cal stopped as her grave came into view. Except he wasn't alone. A woman stood there, tall, silver-haired, dressed in a long black coat. She held a small bouquet of white lilies trembling slightly in the breeze, and beside her a little girl in a navy blue dress and white tights, her curls escaping from under a wool cap. They didn't notice him at first. The girl knelt in front of the headstone, touching the carved letters like she was tracing the name. Then she looked up. Cal froze. Green eyes, not just any green. Tess's green. That impossible mix of jade and moss with flecks of gold when the light hit just right. The woman turned slowly, startled. Her face paled when she saw him. "Mr. Donovan?" she asked, her voice lightly accented German, he thought. Her eyes were tired but alert. "Yes," he said, cautious, confused. "I'm Cal." "Who are you?" She stepped toward him, the girl holding tightly to her hand. "My name is Marta Weber. I was Tess's friend, from Berlin." Cal's heart thudded. "I'm sorry," she added softly. "I didn't mean to intrude. I promised Tess I would come." To her grave, Marta reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, thick and sealed. Her fingers trembled as she held it out. "She asked me to give you this. Today. On this date. She made me promise." Cal hesitated before taking it. His name was written on the front in Tess's handwriting. Sharp, elegant script, the way she signed her paintings. He hadn't seen it in years, but the sight of it now brought heat behind his eyes. He cleared his throat. "What is this?" Marta looked down at the little girl. "There's no good way to explain here. Maybe we sit." They moved to a nearby bench under a live oak, the child staying close to Marta's side. Cal glanced at her again. Her face was smaller, rounder than Tess's, but the eyes, God, the eyes were hers. She was maybe 6, maybe 7. No older. "She's beautiful," he said before he could stop himself. Marta nodded. "Her name is Sophie." Silence stretched, broken only by the rustling trees. "I'm sorry," Cal said again. "I'm just confused. Why would Tess ask you to give me something 3 years after she passed? And this—" He looked at Sophie, his voice faltering. "She'll explain," Marta said, gently nodding toward the letter. "It's all in there." Cal stared at the envelope. His thumb ran over the seal, hesitating. His chest felt tight. He'd built a whole life out of moving on, raising Benji alone, working a job that paid the bills, nothing more. He hadn't made space for surprises. And now a German woman with his ex-wife's secrets had shown up with a little girl who looked like Tess, and stared at him like she knew something he didn't. Sophie tilted her head and looked at him again. Then suddenly she stepped forward. Before Marta could say anything, the girl reached up and touched Cal's face with small, warm fingers. "Daddy," she whispered. The air left his lungs. The world tipped sideways for a second. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. What he asked, barely a sound. She doesn't speak much English yet, Marta said, gently pulling Sophie back. But that word, she's known it for a while. Tess told her stories, showed her photos, letters. Cal shook his head, the letter still unopened in his hand. This can't be. It is, Marta said quietly. He stood up suddenly, needing air. I need to read this. Marta nodded. We'll give you time. Cal walked a few steps away, the letter shaking in his hands. He cracked the seal, unfolded the pages. 2 sheets, front and back, covered in Tess's handwriting. His name at the top. Cal, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And Marta has kept her promise. His eyes blurred. He blinked hard, trying to focus. I got pregnant 3 weeks after you came by to pick up the last of your books. You remember that night, the wine, the arguments, the apology, the way we forgot why we were ever angry. I found out I was pregnant just before I left for Berlin. Cal stopped reading. His throat burned. She knew, all this time. And she didn't tell him. Marta helped me raise Sophie. I was too scared to tell you, scared of the custody fight, scared I'd lose her. I was wrong. I should have told you. But now, you have a chance to know her, to be her father. Please, Cal. She deserves that. He read the rest, but the words didn't fully sink in. Not yet. He turned back to the bench. Marta looked up. I know this is too much, but I am sick. I won't be able to care for her much longer. Tess made me promise I would bring her to you, so she would not be alone. Sophie looked up at him again. The breeze kicked up. Cal saw Benji now walking slowly toward them from the car, watching everything unfold from a distance. His son, his daughter, a stranger, a letter from the dead. Why today, he asked Marta. Why this date? It's 3 years to the day, she said. Tess said, it would be enough time to grieve, and maybe to forgive. Cal looked at the two of them, then back at the letter in his hand. Everything in his life had just changed, and somehow he already knew. This was just the beginning. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought matter to me either way. The letter sat on the kitchen table, like it might burn through the wood. Cal hadn't spoken since they got back to the house. The ride from the cemetery had been nearly silent. Benji had sat in the back seat, earbuds in, but not listening to anything, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every time Sophie glanced his way. She hadn't said a word either, just clutched her stuffed rabbit and stared out the window like none of this was real. It didn't feel real to Cal either. Marta sipped a glass of water across from him, hands folded, waiting. The quiet between them felt thick, heavy like fog that refused to lift. I keep going back to that night, he said finally, voice rough. She made it seem like goodbye. But it wasn't. Not really. Marta gave a small nod. Tess told me. It was tender, that it mattered. He exhaled through his nose, trying to steady the storm inside him. And then she just left. Pregnant. Didn't tell me. For 6 years. She was scared, Marta said gently, of losing her independence, of being pulled back into something broken. We weren't broken that night, he said quickly, too quickly. His voice dropped. Not that night. Marta looked at him carefully. But you were before it. He didn't answer. Didn't need to. He looked across the room. Sophie sat on the rug with Benji's old blocks. She wasn't building anything, just stacking and unstacking like her hands needed to do something. Her hair had come loose, soft curls falling into her eyes. She brushed them back with a frustrated huff that made his heart squeeze. That was Tess's huff. Marta followed his gaze. She looks more like Tess every day, she said. But her personality, I think that part is still finding itself. I should be angry, he said, jaw tight. I am angry. She kept this from me. She regretted it, Marta said softly. You'll see that when you read the second page. Cal blinked. There's more. Marta stood and reached into her tote bag, pulling out a second envelope. She wrote 2 letters, one for shock, one for truth. She asked me not to give this one until you'd had time to breathe. He took it with a strange hesitation, like he was holding a piece of Tess's soul. He hadn't thought he'd ever get another chance to know her again. Now here she was, speaking from beyond the veil in paragraphs and secrets. He opened it slowly. Marta stepped away, giving him space. Cal, if you've gotten this far, thank you. I know you're angry. I was angry at myself too. I made the decision fast and selfishly, and I lived with it every day. I want to tell you what the last 6 years were like, but not just for me. For Sophie? I want you to know her. Really know her. Her favorite color is yellow. She calls daisies sun faces. She hums when she's nervous, usually something I used to sing when she was small. She likes her pancakes with cinnamon and no syrup. She has your focus. She'll sit and draw for hours. She knows about you. Not everything, but the important part. That you loved me once. That you are her father. That if anything ever happened to me, you'd be the one I'd want her with. I don't expect you to step in. I only hope you want to. Love, Tess. Cal wiped at his eyes before they fully brimmed. He looked at the little girl again. Sophie had stacked the blocks into a tall tower and was slowly knocking them down one by one, her lips pressed together in quiet concentration. She didn't know he was watching. Benji, finally curious, drifted in from the hallway and sat nearby, watching her carefully. You don't talk much, he said. Sophie didn't respond at first. I don't either, Benji added. Still nothing. Want to see my lizard? He offered. She turned then. Her expression was wary but not afraid. What's his name? Ziggy Benji said. She nodded once. Okay. Cal's heart did something strange. He folded the letter, stood, and stepped into the room. Sophie, he said. She looked up. He knelt down, slow and careful, like approaching a skittish animal. Can I show you something? She didn't move, but she didn't say no. He walked to the bookshelf, pulled down a large flat box covered in dust. Inside were sketchbooks, his from years ago, back when he still believed he could make a living from his art. Before law school, before marriage, before real life stepped in. He opened one to a page of pencil sketches, Tess curled up on a couch, her eyes closed, laughing in the kitchen, sitting on the porch with a paintbrush in her mouth and a mug in her hand. She loved these, he said quietly. Said they captured something photos never could. Sophie inched closer. Her eyes landed on a drawing of Tess barefoot in the grass, looking over her shoulder. That's Mama, she whispered. He nodded. She pointed at another. That's you. His throat tightened. Yeah, that's me. She sat beside him without asking, leaning close the way kids do when they trust their instincts more than their logic. Do you draw? He asked. She nodded. Want to show me? Sophie hesitated, then went to her little bag and pulled out a small dog-eared notebook. She handed it to him, wordlessly. He opened it and froze. There were crayon drawings, childlike, yes, but one page made him stop. A little house with a tree beside it, a blue front door, the exact kind of mail slot they had back when he and Tess lived in their rental in Asheville. She's never been there, he murmured. She said Mama showed her in a dream, Marta said quietly from behind. Cal looked up. That's not possible. She's dreamed of many things, Marta said. Some real, some not. But this one I think it was real. He closed the sketchbook gently, handed it back to Sophie. You're a good artist, he said. She smiled, small crooked. Tess's smile. Marta walked to the door, pulling on her coat. "I'll go now. Let you think. She can stay with me at the inn." "No," Cal said, surprising himself. Marta turned. "She stays here," he said. "Tonight at least." Marta exhaled slowly. "You're sure no," he admitted. "But I want to be." She nodded once, slowly. "Then I'll come in the morning. For breakfast." Sophie looked up at him. "Do you have cinnamon?" Cal blinked. "What?" "For pancakes," she said, tilting her head like it was obvious. He let out a laugh, soft, shaky. "Yeah, kid. I've got cinnamon." The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and sleep. Morning light filtered in through the blinds, striping the worn hardwood floor in gold. Cal stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, while Sophie sat silently at the small table, her feet swinging above the floor. She clutched the same stuffed rabbit from the day before its ears, now slightly damp from what he guessed had been a difficult night. He glanced over at her. She hadn't said much since waking up, just nodded when he offered breakfast, and whispered thank you when he handed her a fork. Benji padded in a minute later, still in pajama pants, rubbing his eyes. "She talks," he muttered, as he passed Cal on the way to the fridge. "Just not to me." Cal raised an eyebrow. "She'll warm up. She called you Daddy." The air shifted. Cal didn't turn from the stove. "I know. She just met you. I know that too." Benji sat down with a bowl of cereal, crunching angrily. Sophie didn't look at him. He didn't look at her. The table between them felt like a fault line. Marta arrived 5 minutes later, wrapped in a scarf, cheeks pink from the crisp air. "I brought her sketchbook," she said, holding up a small, leather-bound journal. She forgot it at the inn. Sophie's face lit up for the first time all morning. She stood and ran to Marta, hugging her waist tightly. Marta smoothed her hair gently, whispering something in German. Benji watched from the table, eyes narrowing just slightly. "I'll leave her with you again today," Marta said to Cal. "If that's still okay." He nodded, pouring a second batch of batter. "Of course. I have a medical appointment this afternoon, just some tests. I won't be long." Something flickered in her expression, just enough for Cal to notice. "You doing all right?" he asked. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm tired, but I'm still here." She kissed Sophie's head, then turned to go. Cal watched her go, a question rising in his throat he didn't ask. The pancakes were getting cold. "All right," he said, setting plates down. "Let's eat." Sophie picked up her fork and started cutting tiny squares, carefully pushing them to the side before eating one. Benji stabbed his cereal harder than necessary. Cal tried to pretend he didn't notice the storm brewing at the table. "Benji," he said, trying to sound casual. "You doing okay, I guess?" "You want to talk?" Benji shrugged. "What would I even say? You could say what's on your mind." Benji looked at him, then really looked. "You didn't tell me about her." Cal sat down. "I didn't know. You knew Tess was pregnant?" "No," he said more sharply than intended. "I didn't. She never told me. I found out the same time you did." Benji leaned back, his tone a little too cool. "And now she's just here." Sophie looked down at her plate. Cal exhaled slowly. "Benji. I just think it's weird that she's here, and I'm supposed to be fine with it. No one said you had to be fine. She calls you Dad. She doesn't have anyone else." Benji pushed back from the table. "Neither did I." The words hit harder than they should have. Cal's chest tightened. "That's not fair. I'm going to my room." "Benji." But the boy was already walking away, bowl in hand, disappearing down the hall. Sophie didn't look up. Cal stared at the pancakes, untouched. "I'm sorry," Sophie whispered. He turned to her, caught off guard. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said gently. She shook her head. "He doesn't want me here. He's just confused. This is new for all of us." Her eyes welled and she blinked fast. "Do you want to go play outside?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. They went out to the backyard, where the early morning dew still clung to the grass. The old swing set was crooked, but it still worked. Cal gave her a push. She didn't say anything, just leaned back and closed her eyes as the breeze rushed over her face. It was peaceful for a while. Then her voice broke the quiet. "Is it true Mama died here?" He nodded. "Yes." "She came back when she got sick. She wanted to be home. Was she scared?" He swallowed. "I think everyone's a little scared when they know they don't have much time. But she was brave. She wrote letters, not just to you, to me too. Marta said I'll get them when I'm older. That sounds like something she'd do." "Do you miss her every day?" he thought. "Every minute." "Yes," he said. "But it's different now. When someone's been gone for a while, missing them changes. It gets quieter, but it doesn't go away." Sophie dragged the tips of her shoes in the dirt, slowing herself. "Benji doesn't like me. He doesn't know you yet. Do you like me?" He looked at her, then really looked at her small hands gripping the chains at her cheeks, still red from crying at the curls blown wild by the wind. "I don't know you yet either," he said honestly, "but I want to. That's what matters." She nodded, looking away. "Then softly, I miss my home." He sat on the edge of the porch. "Where was home for you, Berlin?" "Marta's apartment. It smelled like coffee and paint. I had a window by the street. Mama used to sit with me and tell stories. What kind of stories? Ones about you. How you were good with pencils. How you used to draw her when she was asleep." He felt his throat close. "She told me you weren't ready. But that one day, you might be." Cal didn't know what to say. Sophie hopped off the swing and walked to him, holding out something from her coat pocket. It was a crumpled photo, Tess holding baby Sophie in her lap, both smiling at something just off camera. The edges were worn, folded 100 times, maybe more. "I keep this with me," she said. He took it carefully, running his thumb over Tess's face. "She looks happy?" She was, I think. She knew this was going to happen. He looked at her. "What do you mean?" Sophie shrugged. She said sometimes we don't get to choose how the story ends. But we can choose what happens next. Cal stared at her quiet. This little girl had Tess's eyes, Tess's stubbornness, Tess's poetry, and now she had him. Somewhere behind them, the screen door creaked open. Benji stepped out, barefoot, arms crossed. He looked at Sophie, then at Cal. "I fixed the swing chain," he said. "It was loose." Sophie looked up at him. "Thanks," she said. He nodded, looking at her a little longer this time. Then he turned and went back inside. Cal looked down at the photo again, the ghost of Tess's smile staring back at him. Maybe she had known. And maybe she'd been right. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1. To let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The front door creaked as Cal stepped into the art studio. The air inside was cooler than the rest of the house, filled with the faint scent of turpentine and dust. Light streamed in through the skylight Tess had insisted on when they moved in all those years ago. She said inspiration needed sun. He'd told her that was too poetic. She'd laughed and told him he was too predictable. Now the space felt haunted and alive all at once. Sophie stood at the far wall, her small hands gripping a stub of colored pencil. She was drawing silently on a large piece of newsprint Cal had tacked up earlier. Next to her was a stack of his old sketchbooks, opened to pages of half-finished portraits and abandoned landscapes. She'd asked to see them that morning, and he hadn't hesitated. He watched her from the doorway, arms crossed, trying to breathe through the ache in his chest. The drawing was rough, childlike, but the composition had purpose. Sophie had drawn 4 figures. One was clearly Tess. One was him. One was a small boy with curly hair, Benji. And the last was her. But something about it stopped him. They weren't holding hands. She'd drawn space between herself and the rest of them. Sophie turned suddenly and saw him watching. Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't hide the drawing. She's still part of everything she said, even if she's not here. He nodded, stepping into the room. She'd like this. All of it. Sophie looked at the sketchbooks again. She said you stopped drawing after she left. I did. Why? He sat on the floor beside her, resting his back against the wall. Because I didn't know how to draw without her in it. Sophie considered that for a long moment. You can draw me. He looked over, surprised. I mean, if you want, she added quickly. You don't have to. He smiled. I'd like that. She handed him a pencil. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the scratch of lead and the occasional rustle of paper. Then the doorbell rang. Sophie looked up. Marta, maybe Cal said, rising to his feet. Stay here, okay? She nodded. He crossed the house and opened the door. But it wasn't Marta. It was Louise Carter Tess's aunt in her 70s, impeccably dressed in a navy blazer, pearl earrings, and a hat far too formal for mid-morning. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes narrowed the moment they met his. Well, she said crisply, you've made a mess, haven't you? Cal blinked. Louise. What are you doing here? I got a call from Marta, she said, pushing past him without waiting for an invitation. She thought I should hear what's happened from someone other than the Savannah rumor mill. Cal shut the door slowly. Rumor mill. Oh, please, she said, waving a hand. You show up at the cemetery with a German woman and a mystery child, people notice, and talk. She stepped into the kitchen, took in the mess, half-finished pancakes, art supplies on the counter, a teacup still half full from earlier. Are you planning to explain? She asked, turning on him. Or do I have to start guessing? He exhaled slowly, leaning against the fridge. Her name is Sophie. She's mine. Tess never told me. Marta raised her after Tess passed. Now Marta's sick, and Tess left instructions for Sophie to come to me. Louise didn't respond for a long time. Her face didn't change, but her grip on her handbag tightened. Is it true? She asked quietly. She's really yours, yes. And you're just taking her in. She's my daughter. Louise gave a sharp laugh. That didn't mean much to you 10 years ago. Cal flinched. She saw it and didn't apologize. You know what Tess told me after the divorce, Louise said, stepping closer. That you were reliable but emotionally empty. That you loved structure more than her. That you didn't fight for her because you didn't know how. She left, he said, his voice low. She took the fellowship. I told her I would try and she left anyway, because trying wasn't enough anymore. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Louise's voice softened. She was wrong too, you know, about you. He looked up, surprised. She thought you wouldn't want this child, that you'd see it as an obligation. Cal swallowed. I might have. Back then. And now he didn't hesitate. Now she's not just my daughter. She's all that's left of Tess. Louise studied him. Then, to his shock, her eyes filled. She looks just like her, she whispered. I saw her from the car window. That little walk, the way her chin lifts when she's nervous. It's Tess all over again. She's in the studio, Cal said quietly. Drawing. Louise wiped at her eyes and pulled herself together with practiced grace. Then I suppose I'd like to say hello. They walked together to the studio. Sophie looked up as they entered, her expression wary, curious. Louise stepped forward slowly and knelt surprisingly graceful for her age. "Hello," she said. "I'm Louise. I'm your mother's aunt. That makes me your great-aunt, I suppose." Sophie stared. "You knew Mama. I raised her after her mother passed," Louise said. "She was just a little older than you." Sophie tilted her head. "Did she draw then, too?" "Constantly," Louise said, smiling. "She painted the walls. Much to my dismay." Cal watched Sophie's body language shift, still cautious but a little more open. "Would you like to see some of her old paintings?" Louise asked. Sophie nodded. Cal felt something loosen in his chest. Louise stood and turned to him. "They're in storage. You'll need to come by and help carry them." "I will." She looked at him a long time. Then her voice dropped. "She would have loved this," she said. "Seeing you with her, I didn't think you had it in you." Cal looked at Sophie, who had gone back to her drawing. "Neither did I," he said. "But I'm learning." Louise smiled faintly, the corners of her mouth twitching. "Let's hope you learn fast," she said. "That girl's going to need someone who knows how to hold a storm." She turned toward the door. "I'll be back Thursday. Bring that boy of yours, too. He'll want to see where Tess grew up." Cal nodded. "Thank you." Louise paused at the door. "And Cal," she added without turning, "don't screw this up." Then she was gone. Cal exhaled and leaned in the doorway of the studio, watching his daughter color Tess's memory back into the world. And for the first time in years, he felt Tess wasn't quite so far away. The house had been quiet for almost an hour. Too quiet. Cal stood at the kitchen sink, hands submerged in soapy water, watching dusk settle over the backyard through the window. The light dipped low and soft, turning the garden gold. Sophie was upstairs working on another drawing. Benji had gone to his room after dinner without saying much again. He dried his hands on a dish towel and stepped into the hallway, pausing at Benji's door. He knocked gently. "Yeah, it's me." Benji didn't answer, but Cal took that as permission. The room hadn't changed much since Tess left. Basketball posters, a bookshelf filled half with school assignments and half with fantasy books. A pair of headphones on the bed. The boy sitting cross-legged on the rug, slowly spinning a pencil between his fingers. "You didn't eat much. Wasn't hungry?" Cal nodded. "You okay, Benji?" Shrugged eyes still on the pencil. "You've barely looked at Sophie today," Cal said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "She's always around. She lives here now." Benji's mouth twitched, but he didn't speak. Cal leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Talk to me, Benj." Benji stopped spinning the pencil. "I don't get it." "What don't you get?" "She just showed up. You didn't even know her. And now you're making room for her like this was always supposed to happen." Cal breathed in slowly. "I know it feels fast. It doesn't feel fast. It feels like you're replacing her." The words hit harder than Cal expected, replacing who he asked even though he already knew. Benji swallowed. "Mom!" Cal sat back, stunned. "Benji, no one could ever replace your mom. You don't talk about her. Not to me. Not in years. And now this girl shows up and suddenly you're digging out sketchbooks and cooking pancakes and laughing in the kitchen. I didn't stop missing her," Cal said, his voice low. "I stopped knowing how to talk about it." Benji looked away, jaw clenched. "I thought I was protecting you," Cal added, "by keeping things stable, by moving forward. But maybe I just made things quieter." Too quiet. Benji's eyes glistened, but he blinked fast, refusing to let anything fall. "I remember how she smelled," he said suddenly, "like paint and oranges, and she'd sing when she made eggs." "Do you remember that?" Cal nodded. "I do. I thought I was forgetting her." "You're not." They sat in silence for a while. Then Benji asked, Do you love Sophie? Cal hesitated. I don't know her well enough yet, but I care about her, and she's part of your mom, which means she's part of us. Benji was quiet again. Then softly, she's scared of thunderstorms. Cal looked at him. I heard her last night, Benji added. She was crying in her room. Marta said she doesn't like thunder. I wanted to go in, but what I didn't know if I should, or if it was my job. Cal stood crossed the room and crouched in front of his son. It's not your job, he said gently. But if you want to be her brother, that's something you get to decide. It's not about replacing anyone. It's about showing up. Benji's eyes dropped. Then he gave a small nod. She likes stories, he murmured. Maybe I'll read to her tomorrow. Cal smiled. I think she'd like that. Benji didn't say anything else, but the air between them had softened. Cal left him there and headed toward the guest room. Sophie was curled up on the bed with her sketchbook drawing under the glow of a little desk lamp. She looked up as he knocked softly. Can I come in? She nodded. He sat at the edge of the bed and glanced at her drawing. Another house this time with stars above it. Looks like home, he said. I tried to remember how it looked at night. You're good at remembering. Sophie shrugged. Marta says my brain is a scrapbook. Cal smiled. That's a nice way of putting it. She set her pencil down. Did I make Benji mad? No. She looked up at him, unconvinced. He's just figuring this out, Cal said. It's a lot, for all of us. I heard him say I don't belong. Cal's breath caught. When yesterday, on the phone with his friend, he said he had to share his room with a girl who isn't really his sister. Oh, Sophie. It's okay, she said quickly, eyes flicking away. I'm used to people not knowing where I fit. He reached over gently, taking her hand. You fit right here, he said. In this house, in this family. You belong even if we're all still learning how. She blinked fast, then gave a quiet nod. Cal stood. I'm going to start bedtime in a bit. You want a nightlight or anything? I have my rabbit. He nodded. Okay. Sleep well. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. Wait. He looked back. Do you still love Mama? His heart cracked open. He stepped back into the room, sat beside her again. I did. I loved her very much. But you didn't stay together. No, he said softly. We had a lot of love. But sometimes love isn't enough when people want different things. Sophie stared at the ceiling. She told me you were a good man, that you'd be scared, but kind. Cal's throat tightened. She said that... She nodded. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, do you want to hear a story about her? Sophie turned her head, surprised. Yes. He smiled faintly. Okay. There was this one night your mom and I were walking home from a little gallery show. It started pouring rain, and we had no umbrella. We ran under a tree soaked through. And Tess, she started dancing in the middle of the sidewalk, just spinning in circles like the rain didn't even matter. She did that a lot, Sophie said. When it rained. Cal nodded. She said storms made her feel like the sky was trying to wash the world clean. Sophie smiled for real then. A soft one, but real. Thank you, she said. He stood slowly. Sleep well, sweetheart. She didn't answer. Just picked up her pencil and began to draw. He turned off the light, leaving only the lamp's golden glow. Down the hall, Benji's door cracked open. The boy peeked out. Is she okay? He whispered. She will be, Cal said. She just needs us to keep showing up. Benji nodded, and after a pause, he disappeared into Sophie's room without saying another word. Cal leaned against the wall in the hallway, listening. Benji's voice soft. Do you want me to read to you? Sophie's quiet reply. Okay. A beat. Then the rustle of pages. The story had begun. Not just in the books they opened, but in the lives they were starting to rewrite. Together. The next morning brought rain. Not a storm, just the kind that made the windows fog up and the sidewalks shine. Cal stood in the doorway with a cup of coffee, watching puddles form along the edges of the garden beds. The whole world looked like it had exhaled. Behind him, the house was slowly waking up. Sophie had padded into the kitchen in her mismatched socks, eyes still half closed, clutching her sketchbook like a favorite blanket. Benji followed a few minutes later, hair sticking up in all directions, mumbling something about waffles. It felt like a family, which made what he had to do next even harder. Marta arrived just after 10, her umbrella dripping as she stepped inside. She looked paler than the last time he saw her. Slower. Her breath caught slightly when she took off her coat, but she smiled through it. "I have something to talk with you about," she said, her voice quiet. Cal nodded. "Same." He led her into the den where the fireplace was lit, and the chairs still held the faintest scent of pine from the candles Tess used to burn. Marta sat carefully, as if even sitting had become work. Cal hesitated, then got to it. "I've started the legal paperwork," he said. "Custody, guardianship, everything I need to make this official." Marta's eyes softened. "I spoke with a lawyer yesterday," he continued. "She said we can file for temporary custody first. Then once the DNA paperwork's processed, we move to permanent." Marta folded her hands in her lap. "That's good. It'll take time. Maybe weeks. I'm not worried about that," she said. Cal paused. "But you are worried." She looked at him, and in her expression he saw the thing she hadn't wanted to say. "I had another scan," she said. "The tumors in my lungs, they're growing faster than they thought." His throat tightened. "How long?" She shook her head. "They don't know. But months, not years." The room went still. "I've prepared everything," she added quickly. "Medical release, letters for Sophie, a video message even. Her voice caught. "I just didn't want to leave her until I knew she had somewhere steady." "She does," Cal said quietly. "With us." Marta looked away, blinking fast. "I've been with her since the day she was born. I watched her take her first step, say her first word. I taught her how to tie her shoes. I held her while Tess slept through the chemo." Cal reached over, gently touched her hand. "You've given her more than anyone could ask for." "I want her to know where she came from," Marta whispered. "But I also want her to believe in where she's going. She will." They sat in silence, the rain tapping gently against the windows. Then Marta said something that shifted the air. "Tess wanted to marry you again." Cal looked up, startled. "She told me," Marta said. "Before she got sick again. She never stopped loving you. She just didn't know how to come back." He stared at the fireplace. "I didn't know how to ask her to." "She was waiting for a sign," Marta said. "But then, the time just slipped." Cal's heart ached in that old familiar way, like a door swinging shut you didn't realize was still open. "Maybe it's not too late," he said quietly. Marta tilted her head. "You still love her," he gave the smallest nod. "She's gone, Cal." "I know." She waited. "But that doesn't change what I feel," he said. "It just changes what I do with it." Marta's eyes softened. "Then do something with it. For Sophie, for all of you." They heard footsteps, then small ones, and Sophie appeared in the doorway, clutching a piece of paper. "I finished it," she said. Marta smiled gently. "Can I see?" Sophie nodded and handed over the page. It was a drawing of the house, like always, but this time the porch had flower pots, and there was smoke coming from the chimney. 3 figures stood at the front, Cal, Benji, and Sophie, and just behind them by the tree was a 4th figure. Tess, Her hair loose, her eyes looking straight ahead, her hand raised in a wave. She watches, Sophie said. In the dreams. Cal reached for the arm of the chair, grounding himself. I think she does, Marta whispered. Sophie climbed into her lap without asking, curling against her like she always had. Cal watched them, this strange, beautiful picture of past and present holding each other. Later, when Marta rested in the guest room, exhausted from just a few hours of conversation, Cal sat with his lawyer on a video call. Her voice crackled slightly through the connection. We'll file for emergency custody today, she said. DNA paperwork is already in process from the German lab. I'll request local confirmation from a U.S. clinic, too. That'll speed things up. And the home study, he asked. You'll need to meet with a social worker, she said. They'll evaluate your living space routines, parenting preparedness. Cal looked around the house, messy in a lived-in way. Walls filled with old art and new sketches, a kitchen that now constantly smelled like cinnamon and apples. I think we're getting there, he said. I'll also notify the court that Sophie's current guardian is medically unfit for continued care. He winced. Can you phrase it gently? The lawyer gave a tired smile. I'll do my best. After the call, Cal found Benji in the living room, reading aloud to Sophie again. She'd curled up on the couch, her head against his shoulder. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, heart full and aching at the same time. Benji noticed him and paused. We were going to do popcorn. You should, Cal said. It's a good popcorn kind of day. Sophie looked up. Will you watch the movie with us? Cal smiled. Yeah, I'd like that. They made popcorn. Spilled half of it, argued over which blanket was the best, and eventually settled on a worn one with tiny stars printed along the edge. The three of them on the couch, wrapped in the quiet comfort of rain and family. Halfway through the movie, Sophie leaned against him and whispered, Do you think Mama would like this movie? He didn't answer right away. He looked at the screen at the flickering colors, then back at her. She'd love that you're here watching it, he said. That we all are. Sophie smiled, eyes already drifting shut. Cal glanced toward the hallway where Marta rested, knowing that soon she'd be gone. But tonight she was still here, and so was everything Tess left behind. Love in pieces, love remade, love somehow still growing. The morning sun returned like a quiet apology after days of rain. Soft light spilled across the front porch, catching on the wind chimes that Tess had hung long ago, little brass birds that clinked like gentle reminders. Cal sat on the top step, coffee in hand, watching Sophie draw chalk hearts on the walkway. She was still in her pajamas, her curls tied in a crooked ponytail, humming to herself. He wasn't sure how a child who'd seen so much change could still hum like that. Light off key, completely unself-conscious. Behind him, the screen door creaked. Benji stepped out, biting into an apple, then sat beside his dad without a word. They watched her for a while in silence. She's pretty good at that, Benji said. Yeah. She made a drawing of me yesterday. I had 3 heads. Cal chuckled. Maybe she sees potential. Benji grinned faintly, chewing. Is Marta still sleeping? Yeah, Cal said. She had a rough night. Lot of coughing. Benji grew quiet again, then said, She okay? No, Cal answered truthfully. She's getting sicker. Benji nodded slowly as if trying to understand something far too big for his age. Will she go away too? Cal swallowed. Sooner than we want her to. They watched Sophie for a few more moments. She'll miss her a lot, Benji said. I think we all will. Sophie turned around just then and waved at them with both arms chalk staining her fingers pink and blue. Come draw, Benji stood before Cal could respond. Let's go before she gives me 4 heads this time. Cal smiled, following him down the steps. They spent the morning drawing suns and stars, a crooked dog, something that might have been a spaceship. At one point, Sophie leaned close and whispered to Benji, and he nodded, grabbing yellow chalk like it was a mission. By noon, the walkway looked like a stained glass window. Marta joined them after lunch. She was thinner than last week, her skin more translucent, but she smiled like nothing had changed. She sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the kids play tag in the yard. "I used to sit like this with Tess," she said softly. "She'd dance across the grass, spinning like the world couldn't touch her." Cal handed her a mug of tea. "Sophie does the same thing. She's her mother's child," Marta said, then added, "But she's yours too." He looked out at the girl twirling with arms wide open, Benji laughing behind her. "I see it now. You've come a long way in a short time." Cal turned to her. "I didn't know I had it in me." Marta gave him a look. Tess knew. They sat in the afternoon light watching the past and future chase each other across the yard. Then Cal's phone buzzed. A message from Louise. "Have you told her about the letter yet?" Cal stared at it. He hadn't. Not yet. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, and Marta had taken her medication and slipped into another fitful rest, Cal went to the attic. The box was where Louise said it would be beneath old photo albums and a moth-eaten winter coat Tess had refused to throw away. Inside, wrapped in a faded silk scarf, was the letter. The envelope was thick-sealed with red wax, her handwriting on the front, "For Cal. When you're ready." He didn't open it. Not yet. He sat there for a long while, holding it in both hands, heart thudding like it used to when he'd wait for her after an art show, always wondering if she'd light up when she saw him or keep walking. When he finally went downstairs, it was nearly midnight. He paused at Sophie's door. The light was off, just the faint glow of the moon through the curtains. He stepped in quietly. She was asleep, curled on her side, the stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Next to her pillow was a new drawing. Him holding her hand, Benji beside them, and Marta behind them, all wrapped in stars. He knelt and adjusted her blanket. For a long moment, he just watched her breathe. This small life, this second chance. Then he went to his room, placed the letter on his nightstand, and stared at it like it might answer every question he was too afraid to ask. In the quiet, he whispered to no one, "I'm almost ready." The wind moved the chimes outside, soft and clear, like someone saying, "I know." A warm breeze drifted in through the open windows, carrying the smell of spring jasmine and the faint sound of wind chimes clinking on the porch. The house felt lighter somehow. It had only been a few weeks since Sophie arrived, but in that time, it was as if her presence had drawn color back into corners of the house that had stayed gray for too long. Cal stood in front of the stove, flipping French toast while humming a tune he hadn't thought of in years, something Tess used to play on Sunday mornings. Behind him, Marta sat at the kitchen table sipping tea with both hands wrapped around the mug, like it was her lifeline. Her face was pale, but there was still a spark behind her eyes. Cal couldn't tell if it was hope or stubbornness. Maybe both. Benji shuffled in first, yawning and dragging his feet. He offered a sleepy grunt, grabbed a banana, and sat next to Marta without saying a word. Sophie followed close behind, wearing one of Benji's old t-shirts, as pajamas, her curls wild and tangled, like she'd been dreaming with her whole body. "Something smells good," she said, climbing onto the bench beside Marta. "French toast," Cal said, plating it carefully, "with extra cinnamon, just like your mom used to make it." Sophie grinned. She'd burn one every time. "And pretend it was on purpose," Marta added, smiling. Cal set the plates on the table. She said burnt ones were the crunchy batch. Like that was a good thing. Everyone laughed, even Benji quietly. It was the kind of moment that should have felt ordinary, but it didn't. It felt like a moment someone would remember in 20 years. As they ate, Marta looked out the window, watching the way the morning sun touched the tops of the azaleas. "Do you remember the library downtown?" she asked softly. The one Tess used to love. Cal nodded. "The old one near Forsyth Park. She always said she wanted to show Sophie the rose garden there." Sophie looked up. "Can we go?" Marta smiled. "I think that would be nice." An hour later, they were packed into the car. Cal drove, Marta sat up front, and the kids were in the back, Sophie quietly sketching something in her notebook, while Benji scrolled through music on his phone. As they passed familiar streets and old magnolia trees draped with Spanish moss, memories stirred. Cal hadn't been to the library in years, not since the days he and Tess would spend lazy Saturdays there, her getting lost in art books, while he tried and failed to understand poetry. When they arrived, Marta stayed behind on a bench near the entrance, her breathing too shallow for long walks. She waved them off, smiling faintly, and promised she'd be fine. The three of them strolled down the stone path toward the rose garden. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers. Cal glanced down at Sophie, who had slowed beside him, eyes scanning everything. "Is this what she wanted me to see?" she asked softly. He nodded. She used to say this place felt like walking through a painting. Sophie ran her fingers along the petals of a pink bloom. "It does." Benji wandered a few feet ahead, then turned around. "Dad, remember that bench?" Cal followed his gaze and smiled. "Yeah, that's where she first read to me." Sophie blinked. "Mama read to you all the time?" Cal said, motioning for them to sit. "It's how we started." They sat on the weather-worn bench, the sun warming their backs. "She was reading something called The Little Prince," Cal said. "I didn't get half of it, but she kept going. She said it wasn't about understanding. It was about feeling." Sophie pulled her knees up to her chest. "I have that book." Marta read it to me. Cal leaned back, eyes closed for a moment. Then she passed it on the right way. They sat in a kind of shared quiet that didn't need filling. But then Sophie whispered, "What happens when Marta's not here?" The question hung in the air like a held breath. Cal turned to her. "She'll always be here, Sophie, just not the same way. But she won't be in the kitchen, or the car, or the stories." "No," he said gently. "But she'll be in your memories, in everything she taught you, and in the people who loved her. That includes me." Sophie's eyes shimmered. She turned away quickly, pretending to look at the roses again. Benji spoke up, voice lower than usual. "It's okay to be scared." Sophie looked at him. "Are you scared?" Benji nodded. "Yeah, a lot. But it's better when we're all scared together." Cal watched as Sophie reached over and took Benji's hand. His surprised face softened into something that looked like peace. They sat like that until the shadow started to stretch across the garden path. Later on the drive home, Marta was quiet. Her hand rested gently on Cal's arm as he helped her into the car. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For making a memory that'll last after I'm gone?" Cal's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "You're not gone yet." "No," she said, leaning back against the seat. "But I'm almost ready." The words echoed something he'd whispered just the night before. That night, after the kids were asleep, he sat on the porch with a blanket over his lap, the letter Tess had written in his hands again. He turned it over slowly, then finally quietly, he broke the seal. Inside was one page, just one. But the first line made his breath catch. "If you're reading this, then somehow we found our way back to the same story." He closed his eyes. She'd written to him like she knew how it would all unfold, like she'd planned for him to find her even after she was gone. The rest of the letter, the memories, the regrets, the hope he would read slowly, maybe more than once. But it was that first line that stayed with him. Because somehow, impossibly, they had found their way back. And the story wasn't over yet. The first thing Cal heard was the silence. Not the kind that brought peace, but the kind that pulled at the edges of your chest, like something had gone missing. He stood in the kitchen, coffee untouched, eyes flicking to the hallway. It was past 8. Marta usually sat by now, wrapped in her shawl, with her favorite blue mug, smiling faintly as the kids argued over cereal. But the hallway was still. He walked quietly toward the guest room, careful not to wake the kids. The door was cracked open. Marta lay still, her breathing shallow but steady. A small notebook rested open on her lap, a pen tucked inside its binding. Her face, pale and soft in the morning light, looked peaceful, too peaceful. Cal stepped inside. Marta, her eyes fluttered open, slowly finding him. "You slept late?" he said gently. She blinked like she was trying to come back to the surface. "I was dreaming of Germany," she murmured. "The Rhine in summer, bright fields, my mother's voice." Cal sat at the edge of the bed. "That sounds nice." "I want Sophie to see it one day," she whispered. "Even if I'm not the one who takes her, you can tell her all about it. She'll remember." She looked at him, a long pause, stretching between them. "I'm ready to write the letter." He knew what she meant, the one Sophie would open years from now, when the ache of loss wasn't so sharp and the questions grew louder than the grief. "I'll bring the paper," he said. "And tea." She nodded slowly, then added, "Make it the kind with the rose petals." Tess loved that one. Cal left the room with a quiet exhale and returned to find Sophie standing in the hallway in her socks, rubbing her eyes. She didn't come for breakfast. "She's tired," he said softly. "Want to help me make tea for her?" Sophie nodded already, padding toward the kitchen. As the kettle warmed, Cal found the paper Marta liked, the thick, cream-colored kind, and set it on the table next to her favorite pen. Sophie held the tray carefully, hands steady. When they entered the room, Marta smiled at her like the sight was medicine. "I drew you something," Sophie said, setting the cup down gently. Marta's hands trembled slightly as she reached for it. "You always bring sunshine with you." The drawing was of a garden, not the real one out back, but something imagined. Giant roses, floating stars, 2 women sitting under a tree, while a child ran between them. Cal stepped back to give them space, watching as Marta leaned over and kissed the top of Sophie's head. "Will you stay with me while I write something?" Marta asked. Sophie nodded. "Can I draw next to you?" "Of course." And for the next hour, they sat side by side, Marta with her pen, Sophie with her crayons. Every now and then, Marta would pause, rest her hand, then keep going. The window was cracked just enough to let the breeze in. It carried the scent of wildflowers and the far-off hum of bees. Later, after Sophie went outside with Benji to collect more chalk from the garage, Marta handed Cal the folded letter. "For when she's ready," she said. He held it like it was fragile, something holy. "She won't be alone," he promised. "I know," Marta whispered. "You've become something steady." Her breath hitched, but she pushed past it. "Can you do something else for me?" "Anything. There's a lawyer in town, Ruth Monroe. She helped me with the medical proxy, Sophie's guardianship letters, all of it. She needs to update her file now that your custody petition is moving forward. I'll call her this afternoon. Tell her I want it all finalized by next week, just in case." Cal swallowed the knot rising in his throat. "You're not going anywhere this week," he said gently. She smiled. I've already stayed longer than they expected. There was no fear in her voice, only a calm kind of acceptance like the tide coming in. Certain, gentle, inevitable. That night after the kids went to bed, and Marta had finally fallen asleep again, Cal returned to the porch. The letter from Tess was still folded in his jacket pocket, but he couldn't bring himself to read more than the first line. Instead, he sat in the quiet, listening to the wind. And then faint footsteps. Sophie, barefoot in her nightgown, clutching her rabbit under one arm. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered. He pulled the blanket aside. She climbed into the chair beside him, curling close. "Do you think she'll go soon?" He didn't lie. "Yes, maybe soon." Sophie looked up. "Will it hurt?" She said it won't. "She's not scared." Sophie nodded slowly. "She told me something today." "What was it that Mama always wanted us to find each other?" Cal blinked. "She said Mama knew that we'd both feel lost without her, but maybe together we'd find home again." He pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her. "I think she was right." They sat like that a long time. A soft breeze, the stars just beginning to appear. Somewhere in the distance, the wind chimes sang. And inside the house, a letter sat folded on the nightstand beside a woman who had given her entire life to love and was now ready to let it go. Tomorrow would come. But for tonight they held still. Together. The morning came quiet again, but this time it carried weight. Cal woke before the alarm. The sky outside was that pale lavender shade just before sunrise, when the world feels suspended. He moved through the house like someone tiptoeing through memory, slow, cautious, reverent. Marta hadn't stirred. He peeked into the room and saw her still asleep, lips parted slightly, a soft breath rising and falling under the quilt. A sketch Sophie had done the day before, a tree with stars instead of leaves, rested beside her on the nightstand. He pulled the door gently shut. In the kitchen, Benji was already pouring cereal. He looked up with tired eyes, then glanced toward the hallway. "She okay?" "She's resting." Benji nodded, then surprised Cal with a question. "Is it going to happen soon?" Cal paused at the coffee machine. "Yeah, I think it might." Benji said nothing more, just sat there spoon in hand, staring into his bowl like it might hold an answer. Sophie padded in next her rabbit under one arm, her eyes rimmed with the kind of tired you don't get from sleep. She didn't speak, just slid into the chair next to Benji and leaned against his shoulder. He didn't pull away. Cal set their cups down on the table and offered a soft smile. "After breakfast, how about we go to the beach?" Sophie blinked. "The beach." "She talked about it last week, remember?" he said. "Said she wanted to go one more time, but she can't walk far. We'll bring the folding chairs. Pack light, just a few hours. Enough for her to hear the waves." Sophie looked up at Benji. He gave a small nod. "Okay," she whispered. By late morning, they were loading the car. Marta insisted on sitting up front, wrapped in a soft shawl that had once belonged to her mother. Cal adjusted the seat and tucked a pillow behind her back. "I've got snacks, water, and extra blankets," he said. "You sound like Tess," she said with a faint smile. He glanced at her. That's a compliment. The drive to Tybee Island was slow. Marta slept most of the way, her head tilted toward the window. Cal kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting gently on the folded map in the console, though he didn't need it. He'd driven this road 100 times. The beach was nearly empty when they arrived. A weekday morning in early spring, cool wind, soft sun scattered footprints on the sand. Cal carried the chairs and the blanket. Benji helped Sophie gather shells before even reaching the shore. Marta leaned on Cal's arm as they made their way to the edge of the dunes, then settled into the chair with a long exhale, like she'd just finished a marathon. She looked out at the sea for a long time without saying a word. Sophie sat beside her, pulling her knees to her chest. "It's loud," she said. Marta chuckled. "That's the best part. It drowns everything else." Benji built a crooked sand castle. Cal walked slowly along the edge of the water shoes, in hand, letting the waves lap at his feet. It reminded him of old summers with Tess before everything complicated. When he turned back, he saw Marta waving him over. Her hand trembled slightly. He rushed to her, kneeling beside the chair. "I want to give you something," she said, voice thinner than it had been just an hour before. He leaned in. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small silver locket. Inside, 2 tiny photos, Tess on one side, baby Sophie on the other. "I kept it for her," she said, "but I think it should go to you now." His throat tightened. "Are you sure she'll wear it when she's old enough? You hold on to it until then." He took it carefully, like it might shatter in his hand. Marta placed her hand over his. "You've done everything right, Cal, even the hard parts, especially those." He wanted to answer, but his voice failed him. So he just nodded, and she seemed to understand. That afternoon they stayed until the light began to shift. Marta rested with her eyes closed, a faint smile on her lips, listening to the tide roll in and out. Back at the house, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Cal tucked her into bed. She was exhausted but peaceful, her breathing slower now. Sophie brought in a bowl of water with floating petals, her idea of something beautiful, something soft to keep nearby. Benji placed the sandcastle mold by her window. "So you can imagine the beach again?" he said. Marta touched his face gently. "You're a kind boy." He swallowed, gave a small nod, and left the room. Cal lingered last. She opened her eyes barely. "Promise me something. Anything. When the time comes, be honest with her. Don't hide the hard parts." He nodded. "I will. And let her cry. Let her scream if she needs to, but always remind her she was loved. Deeply. She'll know." Marta looked up at him, her gaze steady. "So were you." Cal blinked fast, then leaned down and kissed her forehead. Outside, the wind chimes stirred. That night, as the stars settled into place and the house grew still, Sophie knocked softly on Cal's door. He opened it, surprised. "I can't sleep." He stepped aside. She climbed onto the bed, the locket now hanging from her neck on a makeshift string of yarn. He lay beside her, both of them staring at the ceiling. "She said she dreamed of the sea," Sophie whispered. Cal nodded. "She saw something beautiful. I think Mama was there." He turned his head toward her. Maybe she was. And then, without warning, Sophie said something so quiet he almost missed it. "Mama said it's okay to go." Cal turned toward her, brows knit. "She said that in my dream?" Sophie whispered. That it was okay to let go. That she'd be waiting. With the flowers. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't speak. He just reached for her hand. And they lay like that, the silence full of more love than words could carry. Somewhere down the hall, the wind shifted through the cracks of an old house, and the chimes sang softly into the night. The morning light was pale and quiet. Too quiet. Cal woke with a sharp breath, the kind that comes when sleep lets go too fast. The air felt still, heavy. He reached for his phone, 6:17 a.m. He listened. No footsteps in the hallway. No clink of a teacup. No soft humming from the kitchen. His feet hit the floor. The hallway felt longer today. When he reached Marta's door, he paused, rested his hand on the knob, took a breath. Then he pushed it open. The room was bathed in soft gold from the rising sun. The curtains swayed slightly from the cracked window. Marta lay still beneath the quilt, her hands folded neatly across her chest. The locket Sophie had worn last night now rested in her open palm. Her expression was peaceful. Eyes closed, lips just barely curved into something like a smile. She was gone. Cal stood frozen, the silence wrapping around him like water. For a moment he didn't move. Couldn't. Then softly footsteps behind him. Sophie. She'd come out of her room in her bunny pajamas, hair still tangled from sleep. Her eyes flicked to the bed, then to Cal's face. He knelt before she could say a word. She went peacefully, he whispered, voice cracking. She didn't hurt. Sophie didn't cry right away. She just nodded slowly and moved past him to the bed. She placed her small hand on Marta's. Did she see Mama Cal swallowed? I think she did. Benji appeared next, standing silently in the doorway. His face was unreadable, but his knuckles were white around the doorframe. Sophie turned, her voice barely audible. She left the locket. Cal opened his hand. It's yours. Sophie took it carefully, her fingers brushing Marta's one last time. Then she turned and walked straight into Cal's arms. He wrapped her tightly and Benji joined without a word, folding into the hug like it was the only thing anchoring them all. Later that morning, Louise arrived. She stood in the living room with her hands clasped, listening as Cal explained what happened. Her face softened with grief, but also something steadier, respect. She prepared everything Louise said. Even the service. It's all written out in this envelope. Cal nodded. That sounds like her. Louise gave him a gentle look. She trusted you, Cal. She knew what kind of man you'd become. He swallowed hard. I just don't want to mess it up. You won't. Before she left, she handed him a second envelope. One more thing. She wrote a letter to the court about Sophie. She asked me to deliver it after. Cal turned it over in his hands. You'll need to file the petition this week. He nodded. I will. That night, after Sophie had finally fallen asleep, and Benji sat quietly with his headphones on in the living room, Cal returned to Marta's room. It smelled faintly of lavender and sea air. He sat on the edge of the bed, the envelope still in his hands. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside, the handwriting was shaky, but strong in its intention. To whom it may concern, this man has shown more love, more courage, and more grace than I ever imagined possible. He wasn't there the day Sophie was born, but he is here now, and that is what matters most. He is her father, not because of biology, but because of how he has chosen to love her. I ask that you honor that love. Give her the home she deserves. Let her stay with him. Marta Riedel. Cal pressed the letter to his chest, eyes brimming with the kind of tears that don't fall, they just live inside you forever. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just sat there and let the quiet fill the room one last time. The courthouse steps were colder than Cal expected, or maybe it was just his nerves. He stood outside with the file tucked under his arm, the one with Marta's letter, Sophie's birth certificate, guardianship papers, and every signed document that proved in black and white what his heart already knew. Benji leaned against the railing, hands stuffed deep in his hoodie pocket. You sure they'll listen? They have to, Cal said quietly. Benji didn't speak for a while. Then he said, She belongs with us. Cal looked at his son and saw something in his face, determination wrapped around fear. He nodded once. Inside, the waiting room smelled of coffee and floor wax. Cal sat between Benji and Sophie, who clutched the locket in her hand, the chain now replaced with a ribbon that matched the dress she'd picked herself. Judge Ruth Monroe entered the small hearing room just after 9. She was older than Cal remembered, with silver hair pinned in a neat twist and a look that said she'd seen everything and still cared deeply. You're Cal Becker, she asked, glancing over the file. Yes, ma'am. She flipped through the pages, pausing on Marta's letter. Her eyes softened. You were not listed on the birth certificate. No, but you're requesting full custody. Yes. She looked up, her gaze not unkind. On what grounds? Cal swallowed. On the grounds that I love her, that I didn't know she existed until a few weeks ago. But ever since I met her, I've done everything I can to be the father she needs. And because Marta trusted me enough to leave her in my care. He hesitated, then added, and because Tess would have wanted it this way. Monroe glanced at Sophie, then at Benji, then back at Cal. And the child. Does she understand what's happening today? Sophie straightened. I'm staying with him. Monroe smiled gently. That was clear. Benji leaned forward. She's my sister. We want her with us. There was a pause just long enough to stretch the air. I read Marta Riedel's statement, Judge Monroe said finally. It's clear she prepared for this carefully. She wrote with conviction. She placed the papers aside and folded her hands. Normally these matters take longer, but considering the circumstances and the clarity of the documentation, I'm prepared to make a ruling. Cal held his breath. I hereby grant full legal custody of Sophie Riedel to Cal Becker. Sophie let out a sound, part gasp, part laugh, and reached for his hand. Benji grinned, eyes shining. Cal nodded, unable to speak. Monroe stood. You have a family to take care of. Go home. Outside the courthouse, they stepped into a sky washed with soft sunlight, the kind that warms everything without making a show of it. Sophie skipped ahead on the sidewalk. Benji walked beside Cal, quiet, until they reached the car. She really did it, Benji said. Marta, she made it happen. Cal glanced at him. She believed in us. Benji gave a small nod. We should do something. For her. To say thank you. Cal looked toward the horizon. We will. That evening back at home, the house felt different. Not emptier despite Marta's absence. Not heavier, despite the weight of the day. It felt more like theirs. They ate dinner on the porch, Marta's favorite soup recipe warming the table. Sophie wore the locket. Benji had tucked her sketchbook beside his chair. After the dishes were cleared and the night settled in around them, Cal brought out a jar of wildflower seeds he'd found in Marta's things. She said she wanted a garden. Sophie leaned in. Can we plant them tomorrow? First thing, Cal said. Benji looked up, where Cal thought for a moment, next to Tess's grave, where Marta first found us. Sophie smiled. She'll like that. The wind moved through the trees. For the first time in weeks, Cal felt still, not the kind of still that comes from holding your breath, the kind that comes from finally letting it go. They were home, and this time they weren't going anywhere. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting soft shadows on the grass. Cal stood in front of Tess's grave with the jar of wildflower seeds in his hands. He could hear Benji behind him carefully unpacking the tools, and Sophie humming a quiet tune as she smoothed out the edge of a small cloth blanket she'd laid on the ground. They had come early, just as the light broke over the trees before the heat of the day settled in. She liked the blue ones, Sophie said, opening her hand to show a few tiny, pale seeds. Marta said blue was peaceful. Cal smiled. Then we'll plant a lot of blue. He knelt and dug his fingers into the soil. It was still cool and soft. Sophie leaned in beside him and began dropping the seeds carefully into the holes he made, her hands trembling with focus. Benji moved slower, watching them from a few steps back. Are we doing it right? There's no wrong way, Cal said. They'll grow. He looked up at the headstone. Tess's name etched there, and beside it Marta's name recently added. two women who'd changed the course of his life in completely different ways, and somehow brought him to the same place. This place. This moment. As they finished covering the last row, Cal sat back on his heels, wiping the dirt from his hands. Sophie tugged his sleeve. "Do you think they know we're here?" He nodded. "I do." Benji looked down at the fresh earth, then turned to Cal. "What do we do now?" Cal thought for a long second, then said, "We keep showing up." That evening back at the house, Cal found himself standing in the doorway of Marta's old room. The bed was made now, the air cleared out, but it still held that sense of something sacred. He'd left it untouched on purpose. He stepped inside, fingers brushing over the quilt, the books still stacked on the nightstand. A journal lay on the corner of the bed, half open. Her handwriting, small and tidy, filled the page. "Don't wait until you're sure. Just love, even when it's messy, even when you're scared. That's when it counts the most." He closed the journal gently and placed it back where it had been. From the hallway he heard laughter, Sophie's laugh, high and clear, followed by Benji's voice calling after her. He followed the sound out to the back porch. The sun was setting, casting the yard in gold. Benji stood barefoot on the grass, chasing Sophie in lazy circles. She clutched the garden hose like a trophy, giggling uncontrollably as he faked a dramatic fall into the lawn. Cal sat on the steps, just watching. Marta had been right. Sophie wasn't just an addition to their family. She was the missing piece they hadn't known they needed. When the laughter finally slowed, and the kids flopped onto the blanket in the yard, Cal walked over and laid down beside them. Above, the sky turned soft with stars. "Do you think we'll always live here?" Sophie asked. Cal looked up at the porch light, flickering to life, the wind chimes stirring with the breeze. "I think we'll always have each other. That's the part that matters." Benji turned to him. "Even if things change again, they will," Cal said. "That's what life does. But this us, we're solid now." Sophie snuggled closer to him. "You smell like dirt." He laughed. "That's how you know I worked hard today." They lay there until the night deepened. Fireflies began to blink across the grass. The stars stretched further into the sky. And somewhere in the back of Cal's mind, something softened. For the first time in years, he wasn't just getting through the day. He was living it. The first wildflower bloomed on a Wednesday. Cal saw it just before dinner, tucked beside the headstone where Tess and Marta now rested. A single blue blossom, small and defiant, standing up through the mulch, as if it had waited for exactly the right moment. He crouched beside it, brushing the petals with his fingertips. Benji spotted him from the carport. "Hey, is that one of ours?" Cal nodded. "The first." Sophie came running out next, her sandals flapping against the porch steps. "Where? Let me see." She dropped to her knees beside Cal and gasped when she saw it. "It's blue," she whispered, just like she wanted. "She'd be smiling right now," Cal said. Sophie leaned forward and kissed the air above the flower. "Hi, Oma," she whispered. "We miss you." That night, Cal couldn't sleep. He sat in the kitchen nursing a cup of tea, watching the shadows move along the tile. The house was quiet in that way. Only familiar places can be filled with echoes, but not haunted by them. He reached into the drawer and pulled out Tess's old recipe box. Marta had added a few of her own before she passed little notes in German, sometimes translated in the margins. He found the one labeled Sommerpfannkuchen. Summer pancakes. Sophie had asked for them the week before. Maybe tomorrow. The back door creaked open, and Benji stepped in, rubbing his eyes. "You all right?" Cal asked. "Couldn't sleep." Cal gestured to the other mug. "There's still some tea." Benji poured and sat across from him, cradling the cup in both hands. He looked older in the soft light. Not grown, but growing. "I've been thinking about Mom a lot," Benji said. Cal nodded. "Me too. She would have liked Sophie, right? She would have adored her. Benji stared into his tea. Do you think she'd be proud of us? Cal didn't answer right away. Then he said, I think she already was, even when we didn't have it all figured out. Benji's voice dropped. I was mad at her after she left. I know, Cal said gently. I didn't get to say goodbye. Cal swallowed his voice tight. I didn't either. Benji looked up, eyes shining. But Sophie did. Twice. Cal reached across the table and placed his hand over his son's. You were there when it mattered. And you're here now. That's what counts. Benji gave a small nod. Yeah. They sat in silence, letting it settle. The next morning, Cal made the summer pancakes. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and fruit. Sophie danced around in her socks while Benji flipped the last one with a quiet grin. Later, they took a drive out to the marshes, stopping at the little boardwalk Tess used to love. Sophie pointed at every heron, every turtle, every wiggling fish in the shallows. As the sun dipped low, casting gold over the water, Cal pulled a folded letter from his jacket. It was addressed to Tess. He hadn't written it all at once, a few lines at a time late at night when the house was still. No one knew he'd done it, not even Benji. He walked to the edge of the boardwalk and read it softly under his breath. Hey, Tess, you were right. I wasn't ready, not for any of it, but I'm trying. Every day, Sophie is bright and wild and brave. You'd love the way she laughs. And Benji, he's stepping up in ways I didn't expect. You should see them together. It's like they were never apart. I still miss you, but I'm not stuck anymore. Thank you for leading me to her, to Marta, to this life. We're okay now. Really. Love, Cal. He folded the letter and tucked it into the hollow of the tree where she used to leave him notes when they dated in college. It felt right. When he turned around, Sophie was watching him with wide, quiet eyes. She didn't say anything, just walked up and wrapped her arms around his waist. He held her close. From the parking lot, Benji called out, You guys coming? Sophie smiled up at him. Let's go home. And Cal, heart full and still mending, took her hand and followed. The house had changed. Not just in the way the furniture shifted over time, or the kids' drawings now framed in the hallway. It was in the rhythm, the quiet hum of a home that had found its center again. Cal stood in the garden, the wildflowers blooming fuller now, blue, yellow, soft pinks. He didn't need a calendar to tell him the seasons were turning. He could feel it in the air, in the way Sophie laughed louder these days and how Benji had started sitting out back with a sketch pad of his own, pretending he wasn't drawing, just like she did. He brushed soil from his hands and looked over at the small wooden bench beside the flower bed. It was new, built by hand, his hands. A plaque carved into the back read, For Marta and Tess, the ones who planted seeds. Daddy Cal turned. Sophie stood on the porch, hugging something close to her chest. Her cheeks were flushed from running eyes bright. Can I show you something? She asked. He nodded, wiping his hands on his jeans. Of course. She led him inside through the kitchen where sunlight spilled across the counters, and a plate of half-eaten cookies waited. On the dining table lay a book, a thick, hard-cover journal. Sophie opened it carefully, revealing pages filled with drawings, some hers, some Benji's. There were small notes in wobbly handwriting, ticket stubs, dried petals, and even a crayon drawing of Marta holding hands with Tess in the clouds. It's our family book, Sophie said softly, for remembering things. Cal turned a few pages. There were photos now. Louise had helped them print a few. One of the three of them sitting under the tree in the cemetery. Another of Sophie in Marta's lap, both laughing mid-bite during a messy pancake breakfast. She'd love this, Cal whispered. She does, Sophie said, like it was the simplest truth in the world. Later that afternoon, they drove out to the hill. The cemetery sat quiet under the breeze, the wildflower bed glowing in the sunlight like a secret garden. Benji carried the book. Sophie brought the locket. They sat in front of the headstones without speaking for a long time. The silence wasn't heavy. It was warm, familiar. Then, with slow, careful hands, Sophie opened the book and began to read aloud. She read the poem she'd written with Benji. She read her note to Marta, short and sweet, with a little drawing of them planting flowers. She read the last page, the one Cal had added the night before. We're doing okay. The house is full again. Not with noise, but with love. We still make pancakes on Sundays. We still leave the porch light on at night. We miss you every day, but we're not lost anymore. We're a family. Because of you. When Sophie closed the book, Cal placed it gently in the little wooden box they'd brought. A time capsule buried at the base of the bench. Not to hide it, but to give it a place to rest. Benji stood brushing his hands on his jeans. She would have wanted us to go get ice cream. Cal smiled. Then we better not disappoint her. They turned to leave, but Sophie hesitated. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a wildflower from the garden, deep blue, and tucked it under the edge of Tess's stone. For Mama, she whispered. Cal reached for her hand. You ready? Sophie nodded. As they walked back to the car, Benji jogged ahead, calling out something about double scoops and sprinkles. Cal glanced down at Sophie. You think they're watching us? She looked up, thoughtful. No. She smiled, squeezing his hand. I think they're walking with us. The wind stirred behind them, soft as a breath, and as the three of them headed toward town, toward ice cream and laughter, and the next chapter of a life none of them had planned, but all of them had chosen the sun dipped low behind the trees, painting everything gold. Love hadn't left. It had simply changed shape and grown roots